Hello, my name is Robert Edwards and I am one of the technologists working as part of CAFRE's Sustainable Land Management branch. In today's short presentation, we will be looking at low emission slurry application and we'll be focusing on the various application methods available to farmers in Northern Ireland. Low emission slurry spreading equipment, or LESSE, has many benefits compared to the more traditional inverted splash plate method of slurry application. Low emission slurry spreading equipment allows the farmer to make better use of their slurry. Research has shown that spreading using low emission application increases the amount of nitrogen available to the plant. Approximately 80% of nitrogen can be lost from slurry spread using a splash plate. Using low emission spreading equipment can reduce these losses by between 30 and 70% depending on the method used. The increase in nitrogen availability allows potential savings in chemical fertiliser, as a greater percentage of the crop nutrient requirement is provided through the slurry. This reduction in nutrient loss also has environmental benefits. Nitrogen is lost from slurry to the atmosphere in the form of ammonia. Increased levels of ammonia in the atmosphere and its subsequent deposition is having a detrimental effect on our natural habitats. Using low emission slurry spreading techniques indirectly reduces nitrous oxide emissions, a potent greenhouse gas. More nitrogen retained in slurry means that more nitrogen is available to the plant, which in turn reduces the demand for inorganic nitrogen application, and so reduces carbon emissions associated with this application. The use of low emission slurry spreading equipment also has potential benefits to local water quality. By placing nutrients closer to the plant roots, increasing nutrient uptake and reducing runoff. 96% of Northern Ireland's ammonia emissions come from agriculture. The chart shown provides detail of agricultural ammonia sources for 2018. This is the most recent assessment of source type available. You will note that ruminant livestock, cattle and sheep, account for 66% of total ammonia emissions. If we look in more detail as to the management category generating ammonia, you can see that 84% of agricultural ammonia is produced from manure and its management. This includes manure production, in-house management and storage, and 34% is directly attributable to land spreading. The first method of low emission slurry spreading is the dribble bar or the trailing hose method. This method pumps the slurry out of the tanker or through the umbilical system through a series of equally spaced hoses which are either trailing along the ground or carried just above the soil and allow the slurry to dribble onto the ground. This system is capable of spreading slurry of up to 9% dry matter. Ammonia losses and sward contamination from the dribble bar are greatly reduced when compared to the splash plate. The dribble bar can achieve 30% reduction in ammonia compared to that of the splash plate, thus also increasing the nitrogen available for crop growth. This is the least expensive method of low emission slurry application. For best performance, i.e. to maximise the fertiliser value of the slurry and minimise ammonia loss, the hoses should be kept as close as possible to the ground. This is because a number of environmental factors affect the rate at which ammonia is released from spread slurry. Increased temperature and increased wind speed are two factors which increase ammonia emissions from slurry. Minimising sward contamination by placing slurry on the ground will help reduce ammonia loss and help reduce nitrogen loss. This system is the lightest system available and is suited to both arable and grassland as it is less damaging to the crop. Dry matter is an important factor when considering low emission slurry application. Slurry dry matter is determined by assessing the amount of solid material left after the animal has finished digesting its food, the presence of bedding material and water content. Dry matter percentage depends mainly on the diet of the animal. For example, Cattle fed high amounts of concentrate will produce higher dry matter slurry, as concentrate-based diets contain a lot less water than grass or forage. Cattle whose diet is mainly conserved forage or grass will generally produce slurry with a lower dry matter content. The photograph on screen shows slurry with ranging dry matter contents. Looking at the sample on the left, the fairly solid sample represents a dry matter of around 10%. The dry matter of the slurry in the middle of the sample is 6%, and the sample on the right around 2% dry matter. It's important that slurry dry matter is assessed before application with low emission equipment. If slurry dry matter is too high, it can lead to blockages. The spreading equipment generally have macerators fitted, which chops the remaining fibre contained in the slurry, allowing it to pass through the pipes. Thick high dry matter slurry may also need to have water added to it at mixing time to allow it to be easier applied. The next method of slurry application is the trail and shoe method. This method is very similar to the dribble bar in operation, with the slurry being pumped through equally sized pipes. However, metal shoes ride along the surface of the soil, they part the vegetation, and ensure that the slurry is placed on the soil surface. The trail and shoe is capable of spreading slurry of up to 6% dry matter. This method can achieve a 60% reduction in ammonia emissions compared to that of the splash plate, and is suitable to both arable and grassland. In addition to delivering higher nutrient value from the slurry, there is much less leaf contamination compared to both the splash plate and the dribble bar. This helps reduce potential slurry contamination at ensiling and allows livestock grazing at an earlier time, post-spreading. As the slurry is placed in bands, it can be more susceptible to surface runoff after rainfall if the band is running up and down the slope. The trail and shoe allows slurry to be applied to fields with a grass cover of up to 2,250 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, or roughly 15 centimeters in height, allowing for a much wider window of opportunity to spread slurry. Spreading slurry with a trail and shoe into a sward with higher grass will also shelter the slurry from the wind and thus help to reduce ammonia emissions post-spreading and also reduce the risk of surface runoff. However, there is a cost associated with this method, as the trail and shoes will wear over time from being constantly trailed along the ground. We now move on to the shallow injection application method. The shallow injection method involves discs which cut slits into the soil. The slurry is then placed into these slits. The shallow injector generally places the slurry between 4 and 6 centimeters into these narrow slits cut into the soil, which are usually spread between 25 and 30 centimeters apart. This method is capable of spreading slurry of up to 6% dry matter. This method can achieve ammonia reduction rates of about 70% due to the minimal contact between the slurry and the air. Can be used on arable or grassland. However, shallow injection may not be suitable to all soil types in Northern Ireland due to the variability of texture, stone content and topography. Trials that have been carried out by Teagasc have identified that shallow injection spreading requires greater tractor power to be able to pull the weight of the injection unit through the soil. And finally, we look at the deep injection application method. This method involves slurry being injected between 10 and 30 centimeters under the ground. It is capable of spreading slurry of up to 6% dry matter. As a result of the deep injection, ammonia emissions are reduced by up to 90%. This method is very damaging to the field and requires the field to be ploughed after the slurry is applied. It is a slow rate of application, with additional power being needed to pull the injector through the deep soil. And it is mainly suited to arable ground prior to sowing. The table below shows a comparison of the various low-emission slurry equipment methods. This table is taken from the CAFRE Code of Good Practice for Ammonia Reduction. The table offers a summary and comparison of the various systems again, showing that the inverted splash plate method is the least effective in retaining nitrogen in the slurry and reducing ammonia emissions. The trailing shoe and shallow injection methods are much more effective in retaining the available nutrients in the slurry and reducing ammonia emissions. As mentioned in a previous slide, slurry dry matter is very important to be considered when using low emission slurry equipment. Using low emission slurry application systems will lead to a slower work rate, as the slurry is being applied more accurately and at a much reduced pressure. Working at a reduced work rate and using a much more accurate equipment will improve uniformity and application of both matching. This allows spreading to be precise, ensuring the whole field is covered evenly, with reduced areas getting either too much or too little slurry. The crop contamination levels from the dribble bar and trailing shoe systems are much reduced from that of the splash plate, which totally covers the crop in slurry. This allows grazing swards to be grazed sooner than if the splash plate were used. Trials by Chagas indicate that it can take up to 6 weeks for grass treated with slurry applied by a splash plate to be palatable to cattle. Using the trailing hose or trailing shoe could reduce this time by up to 4 weeks. Low emission slurry application systems also work to reduce odour. Odour reduction is becoming an increasingly important issue. There is also a financial consideration to using low emission slurry application. The various products range in price, which will be looked at more closely later in the presentation. We are now going to look at some of the production benefits that come from using low emission slurry spreading equipment. This table contains research conducted by AFBE, which compares the effect that the splash plate and low emission methods have on grass yields achieved from second cut silage. The table shown outlines the results of the trial, where slurry applied by splash plate increased the yield by only 0.45% when compared to that of an area which received no slurry application. Using the dribble bar and trailing shoe systems resulted in increased yields of 19 and 21% respectively. This study outlines the benefits of low emission slurry application. This increases the availability of nutrients to the soil and helps the crop to grow. In this table we can see the potential for savings in chemical fertiliser. As we can see, there is 3 comparisons: the splash plate, the trailing shoe and dribble bar, and the shallow injection. The application rate was the same for each of these. The nitrogen recommendation was the same at 120 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. However, the available nitrogen from the slurry differed. The splash plate offered the least available nitrogen, the trailing shoe and dribble bar offered more, and the shallow injection system offered more again. With the available nitrogen differing, also the need for bagged fertiliser differed, with the splash plate needing the most bagged fertiliser to supplement, the trailing shoe and dribble bar needing less, and the shallow injection system needing less again. This resulted in savings of fertiliser. Compared to the splash plate, the dribble bar and trailing shoe can save £4 per hectare, and the shallow injection can offer savings of up to £8 a hectare. This slide looks at purchasing low emission slurry spreading equipment. The prices on screen have been gathered by contacting a range of suppliers and manufacturers, with the prices being averaged to give the price shown on screen. These prices are accurate as of November 2020 and include the price of a 2,000 gallon tanker with low emission application attached. The standard tanker with splash plate is obviously going to be the most cost effective method. The addition of the dribble bar will add about £9,500 to the price of a standard tanker. The larger the piece of equipment, the more expensive this in turn will be, with a trailing shoe being more expensive than a dribble bar, and an injection system being more expensive than a trailing shoe. We haven't included more than one injection system, as a 10-metre injector is not really practical in Northern Ireland, neither is a deep injection system. It is also important to consider tractor power when purchasing low emission slurry spreading equipment. Generally, low emission applications shouldn't require much more horsepower than a standard splash plate. However, it is important to remember there is an increase in weight with low emission slurry spreading. Even the most basic dribble bar system will add about 500 kilograms to the weight of the tanker. It is important that tractors have a front mounted counterweight to balance this, especially as the additional weight may leave the tractor lighter at the back end, and this in turn may reduce grip. And at this point, I would like to introduce my colleague Andrew Thompson, who is a technologist within CAFRE's Sustainable Land Management Branch Water Quality Team. Andrew will now present an outline of the requirements of low emission slurry application within the Nutrients Action Programme 2019 to 2022.
If we now consider situations where LESSE must be used. Firstly, on all derogated farms, slurry applied after the 15th of June each year must be applied using LESSE. Also, from the 1st of February 2020, anyone spreading an anaerobic digestate must also use LESSE. From the 1st of February 2021, all slurry spread by a contractor must be spread using low emission slurry spreading equipment. A contractor is classed as anybody receiving payment who spreads slurry on land on which they do not claim the basic payment scheme payments on. From the 1st of February 2022, all farms with more than 200 cattle livestock units, or farms with a total annual livestock manure nitrogen production of 20,000 kilograms of N or more from pigs, must also use LESSE. If we now look at an example of how to calculate livestock units. The first thing we need to remember is to count cattle livestock units only. There is no need to count sheep, poultry or other types of livestock on the farm. If we take the example of a dairy unit with 150 dairy cows, 2 stock bulls and young stock, we can see the different livestock units that apply to each class of animal. We can add these up, and in this case the total livestock units on this farm are 201, so they are over the limit of 200 livestock units, so in this case the farm must use LESSE when applying slurry. For a suckler cow herd, the only difference is a suckler cow counts as 0.8 livestock units, but other classes of livestock count the same. If we now look at an example of how to calculate the N produced, we only count the nitrogen produced from pigs. We don't need to include other types of livestock. If we take this example of a 250 sow pig unit producing 7,000 pigs per year, we can see the amount of nitrogen produced by each class of pig per year, with sows producing 16 kilograms of N per year and boars 18. If we add them all up, we can see that this pig unit is producing 20,916 kilograms of N per year, which puts them over the 20,000 kilogram limit, so they must also use LESSE when spreading slurry. Farms which are importing or exporting slurry will also have to be aware of LESSE. Farms above the limits previously mentioned must still use LESSE even if they are exporting a significant amount of slurry to other holdings. Farms importing slurry from one of these here units, the use of LESSE is optional.
Thank you very much for watching this short presentation.